Damn it, Aiden, you can't just walk away now. Captain Marlowe's voice cut through the crisp night air, sharp as the snap of dry wood. The fire station yard was quiet except for the hum of engines cooling after another long shift, but his words carried, echoing in the silence that hung between them. Aiden Vance, the youngest firefighter on the team, froze with his jacket slung over one shoulder, his jaw tight. He didn't turn back immediately, though his chest rose and fell with the weight of everything unspoken. For weeks, Aiden had been restless, his grief still fresh from losing his brother in a house fire a year earlier, a tragedy no training manual could prepare him for. He had stayed because fighting flames was all he knew, but every call left him feeling emptier. Tonight, he had decided to resign, to walk away before the job devoured what little remained of him. Marlowe's words, however, struck a wound deeper than Aiden wanted to admit. Before he could reply, a faint sound drifted from the edge of the woods near the station, a high, broken whimper. Both men turned, their hardened expressions softening at the same time. From the shadows, a small stray puppy stumbled into the light, its coat matted with mud, ribs visible beneath thin fur. The animal collapsed onto the gravel, but even as its tiny body shivered, its eyes darted toward the trees, as if urging them to follow. Marlowe crouched, his gruff hands surprisingly gentle as he scooped the trembling creature into his arms. The pup whimpered again and wriggled free, staggering back toward the dark tree line. Looks like it wants us to follow, Marlowe muttered, glancing at Aiden for the first time in months. Something flickered behind Aiden's tired eyes, curiosity, maybe even purpose. Without a word, he grabbed a flashlight from the truck. The two men stepped into the woods, their boots crunching against fallen leaves. The forest was quiet, unnervingly so, as if the world held its breath. The pup darted ahead, pausing every few steps to look back, its eyes glowing faintly in the beam of Aiden's light. They followed deeper, their path winding between skeletal trees, until the station lights disappeared behind them. Where the hell is this thing taking us? Aiden whispered, more to himself than to Marlowe, but Marlowe didn't answer. Something in the way the animal moved, desperate yet certain, kept him silent. It was as though the pup carried a message neither man could ignore. Minutes turned to nearly an hour. Just when Aiden's patience thinned, the forest opened into a small clearing. In the center stood the charred remains of what once had been a cabin, its blackened beams jutting from the ground like broken ribs. The smell of old smoke still clung faintly to the air, though years must have passed since the fire. The puppy whimpered again, circling a collapsed section of wall, pawing at the ash as if trying to dig something free. Aiden felt his chest tighten. The sight of burned wood pulled him backward in memory. His brother's face, the crackle of fire swallowing a home, the screams swallowed by smoke. He staggered, his knees nearly giving way. But Marlowe's hand gripped his shoulder, grounding him. Breathe, the older man said quietly. This isn't then, this is now. The pup yelped again, sharper this time, and scraped at the rubble, until its paw struck something hollow. Aiden dropped beside it, pulling at charred planks until a rusted tin box emerged, half melted but still sealed. Marlowe exchanged a wary glance with him before helping to pry it open. Inside lay brittle scraps of paper, scorched around the edges but legible enough to reveal what they were. Letters, photographs, documents dated nearly 10 years ago. Aiden lifted one photograph carefully, the edges crumbling under his gloves. It showed a young woman holding a newborn child in front of the very cabin they now knelt beside. His eyes narrowed. Beneath the photo was a police report, missing persons. File 2013. Names scrawled across it struck him like a hammer. This wasn't just an abandoned ruin. This was the cabin tied to one of the county's longest unsolved disappearances, a case whispered about in town but never solved. His throat tightened. This can't be real, he murmured, but the weight of the papers said otherwise. The puppy, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, curled against Aiden's boot. Quiet at last. Marlowe exhaled, his voice heavy. Looks like this little one just dragged us into something bigger than we've ever fought. For the first time since his brother's death, Aiden felt something other than emptiness. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't relief. It was a sense of unfinished truth, of a story demanding to be told, of lives that had vanished but left behind, traces waiting to be found. His resignation, his grief, his anger, they all faded for a moment as the forest seemed to close in around them, bearing witness to the discovery. The night pressed colder, and in the distance, an owl called, its voice carrying through the stillness. Aiden lifted the pup into his arms, holding it close. "All right, little one," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Show us the rest." The dog's head nestled against his chest, its tiny body trembling but alive. And though he didn't say it out loud, Aiden knew deep down that this was only the beginning, not just of solving a mystery, but of facing the pieces of himself he had buried beneath ash and silence. The wind whispered through the trees as Aiden and Captain Marlowe crouched over the rusted tin box, its fragile contents scattered between them. The puppy pressed close to Aiden's leg, as if unwilling to let him drift from what had been uncovered. The cabin ruins loomed behind them, blackened timbers clawing at the night sky. Carrying the weight of a silence too thick to ignore, ran a hand through his hair, his chest tightening with each breath. The documents were brittle, yet they spoke louder than any siren he'd ever chased. Marlowe shifted one of the photographs into the beam of his flashlight, his jaw set hard. The young woman's face was tired but tender, her arms wrapped around the infant she held. Behind her, the cabin was whole, smoke curling peacefully from the chimney. There was no hint that tragedy would one day silence it. "This isn't just some old story," Marlowe muttered, his voice low. "This was a family, people who disappeared, and no one ever found out why." Aiden's fingers brushed over the missing persons report again. The names seemed to pulse beneath the paper. Evelyn Hart and her baby, Noah, 10 years missing, presumed dead. The memory of his brother's face flashed in his mind, and for the first time since the fire, Aiden felt a strange kinship with strangers he'd never known. The ache of loss connected them, threading across time and circumstance. The puppy whined suddenly and bolted toward the remnants of a back wall, pawing frantically at the dirt. Marlowe and Aiden scrambled after it, their boots sinking into the soft ground. The pup dug with desperate energy, throwing clumps of soil behind it. Aiden dropped to his knees and began to dig alongside it, ignoring the sting of rocks against his hands. The earth gave way to something solid. When he cleared the dirt, his heart jolted. It was another container, this one sturdier, a weathered, steel lockbox wedged beneath the cabin's collapsed foundation. Marlowe pried it free, his weathered hands straining against the corroded hinges. At last it cracked open, revealing a neatly folded bundle of papers, wrapped in plastic and tied with a faded ribbon. The papers were diaries, written in careful handwriting. Aiden lifted one, his voice unsteady as he began to read aloud. "November 3rd, he found us again. I can't keep Noah safe if he doesn't stop. I hear him outside the windows at night. If anything happens, please." The words cut off. The page charred at the edge. Aiden's throat tightened, the sound of Evelyn's desperation seeping into his bones. Marlowe's face darkened, his brows furrowed. She wasn't just lost, she was hiding. The forest suddenly seemed colder. The idea that someone had stalked this mother and child, driven them into silence and ultimately disappearance, shifted the air around them. Aiden swallowed hard, the old fear of fire replaced now by something even heavier, the shadow of cruelty, that lingered unseen for a decade. The puppy whimpered again, nestling against Aiden's side, as though it knew this discovery carried weight far beyond their night's patrol. He pressed a hand to its small frame, grounding himself in its trembling warmth. For the first time in months he felt alive, his senses sharpened not by flames but by mystery. "Look here," Marlowe said, holding up a second diary entry. "March 12th, Evelyn writes, if anyone finds this, trust no one from the town. They won't believe me. They never did." His eyes met Aiden's hard as flint. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was a cover-up. Someone wanted her silenced. Aiden's pulse pounded in his ears. His brother's death had left him hollow, but now an ember flickered within him. Anger, grief, and determination bound together. He could feel the story unraveling, and somehow he was standing at its center. From the corner of his eye, Aiden noticed something glinting beneath the rubble. He brushed away the dirt to reveal a locket. Its chain snapped, but the clasp intact. Inside was a photograph of the same woman and child, a faint inscription etched along the rim. "Forever yours, Noah." Aiden closed it carefully, his hands trembling. The puppy barked once, a sharp sound that shattered the heavy stillness. The men turned, following its gaze deeper into the woods. Beyond the clearing, something shifted, a branch breaking, the faint crunch of footsteps that didn't belong to them. Marlowe instinctively reached for the small flashlight at his belt, sweeping its beam across the trees. Nothing, just darkness swallowing the edges of the clearing. Aiden's voice dropped to a whisper. "We're not alone," the forest answered, only with silence, but the weight of unseen eyes pressed upon them. The discovery of the diaries and the locket had cracked open more than a mystery. It had stirred something. The forest pressed heavier as the night deepened, each step sinking Aiden and Marlowe deeper into a silence that felt alive. The puppy stayed restless in Aiden's arms, squirming until he finally set it down. The small creature darted forward, circling the remains of the burnt cabin, before slipping into the shadows of a narrow trail that neither of them had noticed before. Aiden's chest tightened. There was something unsettling about the way the dog seemed to know where to go, as though it carried memories older than its small life. "Stay sharp," Marlowe muttered, his flashlight sweeping across the gnarled roots that clawed out of the ground like skeletal hands. His voice was gruff, but there was tension in it, the kind that hinted he was as unnerved as Aiden. Every firefighter learned to respect silence, to recognize when quiet was natural and when it was the kind that held secrets. Tonight, this quiet felt weighted, as if the trees themselves remembered what had happened here. The path curved downward, leading to a shallow gully. At the bottom they found a second structure smaller than the cabin but intact, hidden by vines and rot. Its roof sagged, and its door hung loose on one rusted hinge. The pup stopped, paws rooted, whining low in its throat. Aiden felt his stomach knot. He could see his breath in the cold air, though the night wasn't that frigid. They pushed forward, anyway. Marlowe eased the door open, and the groan of wood echoed far too loud in the stillness. The smell hit them first, not fresh, but old, musty, tinged with the unmistakable sourness of decay. Aiden gagged and pulled his scarf over his nose, while Marlowe lifted his flashlight higher, its beam cutting through the dust. Inside, the room was cramped. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with rusted tools and jars filled with what looked like soil herbs and scraps of paper. In the corner, covered partly by rotting canvas, lay what appeared to be a child's toy chest. Aiden froze, unable to move his pulse, drumming in his ears. The pup pawed at the chest, scratching frantically as if desperate for them to open it. Marlowe knelt, pulling back the canvas with a rough jerk. The chest's lid creaked as he forced it open. Inside were fragments of belongings, a cracked porcelain doll, a pair of small shoes, and a handful of drawings made in shaky crayon. The drawings chilled Aiden more than anything else. They showed a cabin, 2 adults, and a little girl, the same faces from the photograph they had found earlier. But one drawing was different. It showed the family surrounded by dark shapes with jagged lines, the kind a child would use to draw flames. Aiden's throat tightened as he whispered. She knew, she saw what was coming. His hand trembled as he held the paper closer. The implication gnawed at him. Was the fire an accident, or had someone meant for it to happen? Before Marlowe could answer, a noise cut through the night, the snap of a branch, close and deliberate. Both men froze, their flashlights jerking toward the doorway. The puppy growled, a low sound that didn't fit its tiny frame. Someone was out there. Aiden's breath caught. 10 years of unanswered questions suddenly felt like more than just ghosts. They were not alone in these woods. Marlowe's jaw clenched as he motioned for silence. He doused his flashlight, leaving only the faint glow of Aiden's beam. The darkness rushed in, pressing close, and for a long moment the only sound was the pounding of their hearts. Then, faint but certain, came the sound of footsteps retreating into the trees. Whoever had been watching was gone. For now, Aiden exhaled, his hand still gripping the crayon drawings. His grief had always been tied to fire, to loss he couldn't stop. Now it connected with something bigger, a shadow that stretched back a decade and had claimed others before him. The puppy winced softly and pressed against his boot, as if reminding him that leaving wasn't an option. Marlowe finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "We have to bring this back. The station, the police, someone needs to know." But Aiden shook his head, his voice raw. "Not yet. Whoever's out here is hiding something. If we walk away now, it stays buried. Just like my brother's truth did." The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke again, too sharp to present to be just memory. Aiden's eyes locked with Marlowe's, both men realizing at the same moment that the past wasn't just waiting to be uncovered. It was stirring, alive, and closer than either of them had imagined. The wind shifted as the night deepened, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and ash. Aiden's grip tightened on the flashlight, its narrow beam cutting across the blackened bones of the ruined cabin. The puppy whined in his arms, restless, as though it still wanted them to search. Marlowe moved slowly across the debris, boots crunching over fragments of glass and splintered beams, his face shadowed with thought. Something about the silence gnawed at both men, a silence too heavy to belong to just the forest. It was as though the land itself remembered what had been taken from it. Aiden crouched, brushing aside a patch of moss that had crept over the years of abandonment, and his fingers struck metal again. Beneath the damp soil lay a rusted lockbox, heavier than it looked. His pulse quickened as he pried it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside were items more personal than official documents. A small baby's rattle, its paint faded, a wedding ring dulled with time, and a torn photograph of the same woman from before. Now alone, her expression tired and lined with worry, Aiden stared at it, the image blurring as a sharp ache crawled into his chest. "It doesn't make sense," he muttered. "Why would this be left here, hidden?" Marlowe leaned against a charred beam, his voice low. "Maybe someone didn't want it found. Maybe this place isn't just where they vanished. Maybe it's where someone made sure they never returned." His words hung in the air, colder than the night. The puppy squirmed free, landing awkwardly on the ground, and darted toward the tree line again. Aiden and Marlowe exchanged a look before following, their steps quickening. The pup weaved through the underbrush until it stopped at the base of a half-collapsed well, its stones crumbling, vines choking its rim. It barked sharply, its voice echoing into the dark hollow below. Aiden's stomach twisted. He edged closer, shining the light down into the well. What reflected back was not water, but a glint of pale bone beneath layers of soil and rock. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. "God, Marlowe, there's someone down there." Marlowe's jaw clenched, his weathered face hardening as he peered into the abyss. "Not someone," he corrected grimly. "More than one." For a moment, the forest seemed to spin around Aiden. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, the air too thin to fill his lungs. Images of his brother's fire flashed, unbidden smoke, suffocation, the cruel truth that sometimes people were simply gone. But this wasn't an accident. What lay at the bottom of that well was deliberate, an ending forced upon lives that had once smiled for photographs, now crumbling in their hands. The mid-video twist hit him harder than he expected. What began with a lost puppy had unraveled, went to something darker than the rumors whispered across town. The missing persons case wasn't just a disappearance. It was a burial ground disguised by time and silence, left to rot until fate, or perhaps the will of one small, determined animal, had brought it back into the light. Aiden swayed, gripping the stone rim as his legs threatened to give way. He had thought he was done with death, that he had seen its face enough times to grow numb. But here, beneath the stars and the mournful call of the forest, he felt its presence again, raw and undeniable. "Why now?" he whispered hoarsely. "Why lead us here after all these years?" The puppy whimpered at his feet, pressing against his boots, and Aiden realized the weight of what it symbolized. This fragile creature, alone and abandoned, had carried them to truths buried deeper than bones. It wasn't just chance. It was a bridge between the living and the forgotten, a reminder that even silence cannot hold secrets forever. Marlowe's voice, though steady, carried an undercurrent of dread. "We'll have to call this in. But once we do, nothing will stay hidden. Whoever's behind this, if they're still out there, they'll know the past has finally been dug up." Aiden nodded, though his throat tightened with unease. The air around them felt heavier, the shadows more watchful, as if the forest itself was listening. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't just about solving a mystery. It was about surviving what the truth might awaken. The puppy barked, again, sharp and urgent, staring into the woods beyond the well. Aiden followed its gaze, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw movement, a flicker between trees, too tall to be wind, too deliberate to be chance. His chest tightened. The past wasn't as far gone as he hoped. And just like that, the night no longer felt like theirs. It belonged to the secrets rising from the earth, and to whoever had guarded them for a decade. The clearing held its breath as Aiden stared into the well. The hollow darkness below carrying more than bones. It carried stories, silenced families, broken, time stolen. His hand trembled as he pulled the flashlight away, unable to keep looking. For years he had carried his brother's death like a weight chained to his chest, convinced that tragedy was always senseless, always without answer. But now, faced with this discovery, he realized some tragedies weren't accidents. Some were inflicted, chosen, hidden under soil and silence until someone had the courage to drag them back to the surface. Marlowe placed a steady hand on his shoulder, grounding him once again. The older man's voice was quiet, but it carried an iron edge. "We'll get them out. We'll give them back their names." His words weren't just a promise to the dead, but to Aiden too, that the past, however brutal, didn't have to remain buried forever. The puppy circled them, yelping softly as if urging them forward. In its small, fragile form, it carried a weight that neither man could ignore. A creature abandoned had led them to the abandoned. A life unwanted had restored meaning to the lost. Aiden knelt and scooped the pup into his arms, pressing it against his chest. Its heartbeat fluttered beneath his hand, alive, insistent, reminding him that not everything was destined to vanish without trace. By dawn, the site swarmed with investigators, their voices hushed as they unearthed what the earth had tried to keep hidden. Aiden watched from the tree line, exhaustion hollowing his face but something steadier burning in his chest. He had expected to feel relief or even horror, but instead he felt something quieter, the sense that the forgotten had finally been seen. In their recovery, in their names returning to the world, his brother's absence felt less like an endless wound and more like part of a larger story of grief, love, and survival. Marlowe stood beside him, his arms folded, eyes on the rising sun. "You know," he said slowly, "you came out here ready to quit. And now, looks to me like the job's just starting." Aiden didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, the sound of digging and murmured voices filling the air. Finally, he exhaled, the weight in his chest easing just slightly. "Maybe I don't need to walk away," he admitted. "Maybe I just needed a reason to stay." The puppy lifted its head, nudging his chin, and Aiden smiled faintly for the first time in months. He thought of his brother, of the families who would finally have answers, of the strange way fate had worked through a small, desperate animal. Pain and hope were never separate. They lived side by side, shaping each other as the first light spilled across the clearing. Aiden felt a truth settle within him. Some mysteries are never solved by logic or force. They are solved because something refuses to let the forgotten remain unseen. Whether it was a stray pup or the quiet persistence of memory, the world had a way of guiding the living back to the buried. He turned, carrying the puppy toward the stationed forest behind him, whispering in the morning breeze. The night had left its scars, but it had also left him with something rare, a sense that even in loss, there could be meaning. And as the sun broke fully over the horizon, he knew the story of the vanished was no longer silence. It was a truth, returned to light, carried forward not just by reports and evidence, but by the hearts of those who had finally listened.